Neiman Hao.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, right. Good afternoon. Okay, here we are. Journey in 13 segments. This is our week 6 and our last week. So let's get cracking. Again, I always show you to recall the number of segments that we covered, 1 through 7, and then 7 through 13. And today we'll start out with segment 12, the red one, and then that will be followed by the blue one, which will turn into the red one, the summary and wrapping up. So today we'll have how narrative and qualitative, what we covered over the last, I think 4 segments, definitely 5 segments actually, how that fits into what we've been talking about in the first 4 segments, and then we'll sum up. So instead of giving you a brief summary, always going very quickly through, I will not do that today because we'll have 2 summaries basically. I will try to pull things together from 2 ends. Yeah, in segment 12, we will start from the last 2 topics, qualitative and narrative, and move backwards. Yeah, how do those topics fit into the innovation and also the attempts to change education? And then in segment 13, I will do kind of the same thing, but the other way around. I will follow the segments the way we worked through this over the last 6 weeks. So 2 summaries from 2 different ends, and then we also can talk about the different types of summary. So let us start with segment 12, narrative, qualitative, fit. What is the fit into innovative learning? Okay, here's my brief definition, the working agenda, that narrative and qualitative opens a space for the learners to develop and allow them, and then there are 3 points, to reconsider the role of the subjective experience in particular, in how people, how others make sense of themselves, of others, of life, of politics, of different countries, to travel there and find out what it is like there. So how do people make sense? Tourism, by the way, is a really interesting topic. It's becoming a topic also for applied linguists to explore. We need people with knowledge of tourism. But how do people make sense subjectively of something that they experience? So they are the experts, and we are trying to learn from them by stepping, metaphorically, into their shoes, looking at the world from their perspective, their point of view, their experience. So we move into this. And the role of subjective and subjectivity plays a big role here, and we will discuss this a little bit more in a little while. So that is one big important chunk, aspect, perspective of qualitative and also of narrative. Different from that, but similarly relevant, is that in this process, researcher and researchee, the boundaries between the subject and the object, so to speak, or what we are looking at and how we are looking at whatever it is that we are looking at, are becoming more porous, more fluid. Because in the traditional, let's call them objective sciences, those boundaries are very clear. The world is out there, and the mind, human understanding, is trying to explore what is out there. There is no real involvement, engagement. There is no pity, no feeling, nothing of any empathy. It doesn't play a role. You've got to take that at home, leave it at home. But when you go into your research project, you don't worry about those things. So these boundaries are becoming different. And then the other thing is the engagement of our learners typically in small projects, in the classroom, but increasingly outside the classroom. Outside the classroom and hopefully into what we call the real world. Classrooms are real too, we know that. And this distinction is a little bit artificial between real world and the classroom, but outside the classroom, that's where things are taking shape, and that's what we have to bring either into the classroom or we have to take our learners outside the classroom into the real world. And this is where engagement in projects, and some people now call it signature projects, they make them their own. They own them. They work with these projects as something they feel is relevant to them. So these are three aspects, others, but these three are the ones that I would like to highlight in particular as relevant for qualitative and narrative. So with regard to now checking a little bit more into the fit, this is a slide that we had from way back, I think, in segment 5, that we are trying to bring real-world challenges to our learners, engaging in project work, connecting classroom with real world, just the way I tried to already hint at before. And then also turning these processes of learning not just into anything for the test, for the quiz, for next week, Tuesday, but rather as something that becomes a habit of lifelong being open, looking at the world and trying to figure out, how do I fit in, how do others fit in, how can I have some impact here. And the last two, managing complexity, uncertainty, and change, increasingly relevant in the 21st century, divergent thinking, frame breaking, and also setting students up for failure, not just for success, because the world is not, or not to the degree that we used to believe, in particular the social world, as predictable as we hoped or thought it is. It is more unscripted, and that's exactly what we have to prepare our learners for and ourselves as well. And again, collaboration, a very important additional aspect where we are not out there alone and we work with our differences and across our differences. And again, that's something I will return to. So let me just tell you a little bit more the way I also started in the very first segment. I've been basically teaching qualitative and narrative since 1990, which is a pretty long time. I don't know when you were born, but around that time, a little bit earlier. Anyway, so the first 10 years, I just had the opportunity with another colleague of mine who was teaching experimental, and I was teaching qualitative in the same semester. So we both rotated 60 students, so I had 30 students for the first half and he the other, and then we rotated them. So I taught the same qualitative course in half a semester, twice every semester. That means 4 times a year, without getting too bored. All right, so this was for quite a number of years, and it was a great opportunity because there weren't at that time many teachers and many students also who were learning about qualitative. It was a new topic, a new subject, and that was something that I took on. And then since 2000, it became a full semester course. And ever since I teach it, not every semester, but almost every semester. So for quite a while. And over these years, this course has, of course, hopefully also changed. I have changed, the course has changed. My students have changed. And I'll talk about that in a second here. Because at the very beginning, I just taught psychology students, undergraduate students. And then graduate students, actually it was the other way around. I started teaching it as a graduate course. And then I taught the undergraduates for a number of years. But then I turned to teach foreign language students in Germany and in China. Then communication students, students who study communication and culture, typically. And then education students as well. And these were undergraduates and grads, and basically in the United States, in Germany, in China, and in Japan. And I also do little workshops, and they are all over the places. So this is a little bit of my trajectory, how I sailed into this. At least not only to impress you, but rather to show that there's a lot of learning that took place over those decades. But the more interesting part is not the success story, but the pieces where I felt it's not really working. There are certain things that need change, in particular at the very beginning. And I was realizing that there was students' resistance. Students said, oh, this is, I don't know, boring, this is not relevant, why do we have to do this? And then there were these new readings that I bombarded my students with, and the workload is not little. And the expectations of my students, and that's what I learned over time, that I didn't match, or what I didn't match up with the students' expectations. And also, there was a certain lack of institutional support. At the very beginning, that was nice because I could do whatever I wanted. I could experiment a little bit, and people said, he is doing what he's doing. It's okay, fine. But then, and in particular, if you have people who don't like you very much, they may take something like this and turn it against you, and call, for instance, what I've been doing, and this actually happened, that one of the chairs over those years, who didn't seem to like me very much, called what I was doing unprofessional. And if you look at it from afar, that's very possible. It's not exactly what the profession of traditional psychology researchers or communication researchers do, because they do what most of your teachers also do. In the profession, they do experiments, or they run questionnaires, quantitative studies. And of course, there's nothing wrong with it from a qualitative point of view, but I was hoping that from a quantitative, experimental view, there's nothing wrong with a qualitative view. But no, some people, one person in particular, called this unprofessional. It doesn't fit in the profession. Okay, but luckily that was only a very short period, and I was able to defend what I'm doing also by bringing in important people. But that's also what you may expect is happening if you do something that is slightly different from what the profession is doing. You open yourself up to criticism and make yourself vulnerable. But that's not the real unsuccess or point of where I had a lack of success and where I learned. This was more when I reflected on it. Why do students not like what I'm doing in my classes? Well, maybe it has to do with me because I'm not professional. But rather than digging into what I could do better, I thought about the context within which we were operating. And typically a qualitative course is looked at as a methods course. Now, methods courses, and almost every profession, every discipline has methods courses. Methods courses are a funny kind of thing because there is no content in these courses, right? I mean, you don't typically teach content. Or let me put it this way, typically people contrast them with content courses. There are content courses and there are methods courses. Okay, so that may be already one item that I should take further into consideration. Then it contrasts typically with the statistics courses. Yeah, and almost every discipline teaches, in every discipline, there are people who teach statistics. And statistics, again, is a funny course. Statistics has no content. In the sense you don't learn anything about morphology or phonology, or you don't learn anything about people necessarily. But you turn whatever it is that you are looking at or that you are interested in into figures, into numbers. And then you work with these numbers statistically. Yeah, so this is a course that is more in the field of equations, mathematics, logic. Yeah, so this is at least where the public opinion puts statistics. So I realized that a qualitative course was set up against a methods course and also against statistics. And this is exactly what learners bring to the field of qualitative. At first, they expected to be something like it. That's what I got as a response. I expected it to be like stats, or at least I expected it to be like experimental. And it can be similar to a course in experimental. But statistics typically is taught very, very differently. Okay. So that was one field of where I realized I needed to take that into consideration. Where do learners come from when they sail into a course that is called qualitative inquiry, and it is brand new, a brand new field, a brand new operation for them. So then the next one was, and we had this as a discussion early on, when it came to the issue of what about subjectivity and objectivity. Yeah, we are interested in the subjective experience of others. What about our subjectivity? What about our biases or prejudices that we bring into when we observe, when we interpret other people's discourse, other people's stories? And this is definitely something that needs to be addressed very early in each class, in each situation. What is it and how can we navigate subjectivity and objectivity? So this is something, again, that I realized we need to not only address it, but also we need to work with these kinds of notions. Because, again, learners expect us, themselves, to be objective, without any bias. No bias, no prejudice, no nothing, no feeling. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but that is behind the assumptions here that guide discussions around subjectivity and objectivity. And then the final field where I realized that's something that I also need to bring in, address, that typically learners are looking for causal relationships. Causal relationships between situations, that a particular situation is caused by something that happened before, an antecedent. And then the expectations of generalizing, hopefully generalizing to a degree so that we have some universal findings, something that is true for whenever, wherever, however. Okay, so this again is an expectation, an aim, a hope that learners typically bring into methods classes and also into qualitative methods classes. Again, so that is something that needed to be addressed. And in line with this, exactly the relationship between the researcher and what is it that is being researched. The inquirer, the person who is involved in inquiry, and what is inquired into. So these are three major issues. I wouldn't call them problems. But that's exactly what I realized. And coming from being called unprofessional, I thought, okay, we better turn these into pluses, into something that we are working in a positive sense. Okay. So from there, I developed in my own teaching, but also in line with others, with colleagues in the country and internationally, a number of orientations that could guide us. And one was that we have to challenge the existing learning culture, and that we have to challenge these expectations. Because if these expectations go on, then, and we are not feeding these expectations in our teaching, then we cannot be successful. So we have to take these expectations on. And realizing this, we realized that we take on larger aspects of what we would call the learning culture within which students, in particular in the social science, but also in linguistics, applied linguistics especially, are working with. So there is already always an engagement in project work that we could use in order to take them through. And then there are connections from the classroom with the outside world that we also could bring in order to challenge the expectations that people typically have when they hear about or come into a methods course. In addition, the habits of lifelong learning, again from a slide from section 6, where we need to push connections between different fields, between different ways of looking, between different readings, between classroom exercises and what's going on in the real world. So these kinds of connections were something that we felt we really needed to push very hard. And in order to do this, we hoped that that way we could ultimately help students to collaborate and also to engage in new ways of seeing, new ways of uncovering certain items that they had not seen before. Yeah, kind of like I tried to show in my segments, where I brought in some narratives and we worked with them, and when I showed you some clips about the Kyoto train station, and we watched again and again and again and saw something that one could go after and find out more about. So those were classroom exercises, yeah, but relating to some actions, behaviors, interactions in the real world. Good. In order now to change my teaching, and this is the outcome over the years, I brought in new readings, different readings, no textbooks. Remember, I went through why that is important and how these readings are also scaffolds and building on one another. Working with or letting the students work in small groups with the help of a peer learning assistant, somebody who is more experienced. Then the portfolio method, and I think that's something that I really developed to a degree, so I feel comfortable. I feel really comfortable with the portfolio method. And then out of this came also a number of portfolio checks, and I had talked already to a number of you about how to use the portfolio in your future or for yourself. And then the third most important part for me, these three red ones, is I just had to learn to spell out the learning objectives much clearer at the very beginning and bombard the learners with those objectives again and again and again. Because if you just do it at the very beginning and says, well, this is what I hope we'll accomplish by the end of the semester, this is gone in 2 or 3 weeks. But if it is continuously rehashed, reworked, then the learner can relate these objectives to their activities. And that was a very, very important progress in my own teaching of narrative and qualitative. The last three, the small group, collaboration, didn't we have that? Then the project work, the signature work, and the class contact hours, exercises in class. So that all came as parts. And remember, in segment 6, I think it was, That's why we talked about these in a lot more detail, where I tried to argue that these are processes. These are not content governed, but they are procedures of learning, yeah? Circumstances, context within which learning takes place, like having a portfolio, working with a portfolio, yeah? And at the end having a portfolio to look back and write a final paper, much more as a progress report, reflecting on one's learning. So those are the kinds of things that ultimately help, and not just the learner, to become more agentively involved, to become more involved in terms of carrying responsibility in their own projects, but also being and showing more engagement, where the agency of the learner is upgraded, so to speak, where the working with sameness and difference with others becomes really relevant. And relevant also to a degree where difference is being embraced, because we are different. We are not all the same. I will drive that point home another time in 10 minutes. But in small groups, we learn what we are good at, and we learn also where we are not as good as others. But that's good to know, because then we can complement one another. We can also complement each other, but complement in a way so that you take on certain aspects of the larger job that I cannot do. Yeah? So these are very important experiences, and doing this, having these experiences over time, in a couple of different situations, I think is really, really helpful for becoming more conscious of what I can do and what I can't do, where I need help from experts. Nothing wrong with this. And then also the issue of constancy and change, navigating that over a course, over the 2 years of a master program or the 4 years of an undergraduate program. Where do I start? How did I start? And where do I end? How did I end? How did I get there? That kind of reflection is something that is led to by working with narrative and qualitative and bringing it into innovating education.